If today were the last day you could meet God, what would you do to make him recognize that you truly belong to him? April 10th, the feast of Saint Francis of Assisi, is not just another date on the liturgical calendar. It is a sacred moment, a divine reminder that every soul has the power to return home, to rediscover the pure love of God that once set the world ablaze. Many people remember Saint Francis as the gentle man who spoke to birds, embraced lepers, and loved all creation. But behind that gentle smile was a heart once consumed by ambition, vanity, and earthly pleasure. A heart that was completely transformed by the fire of divine love. His story is not a tale of perfection, but of awakening. And this feast is an invitation for you to awaken to begin again, to allow your heart to be touched by grace. Francis was born into wealth. His father was a prosperous cloth merchant, and young Francis lived a carefree life filled with music, feasts, and dreams of glory on the battlefield. He loved adventure, honor, and the admiration of others. But when war came, everything changed. Captured and imprisoned, he found himself broken, sick, and stripped of everything he once valued. In the silence of his cell, a voice called out to him, "Francis, do you wish to serve the servant or the Lord?" That question pierced his soul. When he was released, he was no longer the same. The laughter that once filled his days was replaced by deep reflection. The young man who once sought to conquer the world now sought to understand his place in God's plan. One day, while praying in the crumbling chapel of San Damiano, Francis heard the voice of Christ from the cross. "Francis, rebuild my church, for as you see, it is falling into ruin." He took the command literally, gathering stones and repairing walls with his own hands. But what God truly asked for was not a building. It was Francis himself. God wanted him to rebuild hearts, to restore faith, to remind the world that love is stronger than gold, stronger than fear, stronger than sin. And so, on April 10th, as the Church remembers Saint Francis, this is not merely an act of devotion. It is a call to look inward and ask, is the house of God within me still standing, or has it begun to crumble? You might attend Mass, you might pray, you might even serve, yet inside, your soul may be weary, burdened, or distant. Perhaps your faith has turned into a habit rather than a living flame. But this feast day offers you a chance to rekindle that fire, to love again, to believe again, to give again. Saint Francis once said, "Let us begin again, for up to now we have done nothing." What a humble yet powerful truth. It is not the statement of defeat, but of rebirth. It reminds us that holiness does not mean never falling. It means rising again every time, with greater love. His words are not just for monks and nuns. They are for you, the student, the worker, the parent, the dreamer who feels lost amid the noise of the modern world. Maybe you've been chasing success and forgot what peace feels like. Maybe you've been holding grudges, or you've stopped listening to God's quiet whispers. But Saint Francis' feast invites you to pause, to be still, to look up to heaven and whisper, "Lord, I am here." Because sometimes, what God desires most is not your achievements, but your honesty, not your wealth, but your willingness to be shaped. Francis gave everything away, not because poverty was noble, but because love was richer. When he emptied his hands, his heart finally had room for God, and from that emptiness, peace was born. So, on this holy day, dare to begin again. Lay down your fears, your pride, your distractions, and let your soul breathe. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You just need to be open. God does not seek saints who are never broken. He seeks hearts that allow him to heal them. Just like Francis, you too can become an instrument of peace, a bearer of light, and a living sign that God still works miracles in human hearts. Because holiness does not begin in grand gestures. It begins in a whisper, "Here I am." Lord, and from that whisper, a new life begins, one that no longer belongs to fear, but to grace. If you were to lose everything today, would you still have the courage to believe that God is leading you somewhere beautiful? After Saint Francis gave up his possessions, he had nothing left, no wealth, no security, not even a roof over his head. Yet in that emptiness, he found something the world could never give him, true peace. He walked barefoot among stones, sang with the birds, prayed beneath the open sky. Many thought he had lost his mind, but in truth, he had found his soul. Our lives today aren't so different. We cling to comfort, to money, to approval, to plans we think we can control. We fear losing what we have built, forgetting that everything in this world is passing. God doesn't want us to live in fear of loss. He wants us to live in freedom of trust. He doesn't ask us to abandon everything, but to hold things lightly, to let him be the one we hold most tightly. When Francis walked through the city in torn clothes, smiling as children laughed at him, that smile was not madness, it was freedom. Freedom from pride, freedom from expectations, freedom from the need to prove himself. And that freedom is exactly what God invites you into on this Feast of Saint Francis. Freedom to love, to forgive, to return home to him. Maybe right now, as you hear these words, God is whispering in your heart, will you let go? Let go of resentment. Let go of anger. Let go of the image of perfection that keeps you from being honest. Because only when you release your grip, God can take your hand. Saint Francis once said, it is in giving that we receive. These words carry a truth the world often forgets. When you give love, you receive peace. When you give forgiveness, you receive healing. When you give yourself to God, you receive your truest self back. You lose nothing that truly matters. You only make room for what endures. In a noisy and restless world, God doesn't seek perfection. He seeks authenticity. If your heart is tired, if your faith feels fragile, simply close your eyes and whisper, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Let that prayer sink deep into your soul, the same way Francis prayed it centuries ago before a humble wooden cross. And if these words touch something within you, if you feel even a small spark of hope rising again, I invite you to click the like button or write a short prayer in the comments. That small act of faith might be the message someone else needs to see today. You never know. Your words could be the light that guides a wandering heart back to God. Because God still works miracles through the smallest gestures, a word, a click, a whisper. When you type Amen or Lord, I trust you, you're not just interacting with a video. You're proclaiming that faith still lives, that hope still breathes, that love still reigns. On this April 10th, let the story of Saint Francis become your story. The story of someone brave enough to let go, to trust and to be transformed. The story of a soul that dares to believe losing everything for God is not loss at all, but the beginning of a new life, a life filled with grace, freedom, and peace. When the heart becomes truly still, you realize God's voice was never gone. You just stopped listening. After Saint Francis had given up everything, he entered a new kind of journey, one that was marked by solitude, yet illuminated by divine light. He lived among the poor, walked with the forgotten, and found God's presence in the most ordinary moments. He spoke to the birds, to the wind, to the sun, because he believed every creature was his brother and sister, all born from the same Creator's love. One morning, as dawn broke over the hills of Assisi, Francis saw the dew glistening on the leaves. He smiled and whispered, Lord, even the morning dew praises you through its purity. From that moment, he composed the Canticle of the Creatures, a hymn of breathtaking beauty that praised Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother Fire, Sister Water, and even Sister Death. For Francis, everything was sacred, because everything reflected the face of God. But his journey was not without suffering. The closer he drew to God, the heavier his cross became. His body weakened, his eyes failed, illness consumed him. Yet not once did he complain. Instead, he prayed softly, "Lord, I thank you for allowing me to share in your suffering to the world." He appeared fragile and broken, but within, his soul was radiant, blooming like a garden watered by divine grace, gratitude, and unwavering love. One of his brothers once asked him, "Father Francis, how can you still rejoice while enduring so much pain?" Francis smiled and replied, "True joy does not come from what we possess, but from knowing who walks beside us." That was the secret of his peace. He did not fear loss because he knew he was never alone. And isn't that the same truth we search for in our own lives? There are times when our prayers seem unanswered, when our good deeds go unnoticed, when the night feels endless. We cry out to God, but the heavens stay silent. Yet that silence is not absence. It is invitation to listen with the heart instead of the ears, to trust that his presence remains even when his voice is hidden. Francis understood that the silence of God is not punishment, it is formation. Just as a seed must be buried in darkness to grow, so must the soul pass through suffering to find its light. He did not flee from the cross. He embraced it as his dearest friend. On cold nights, he would whisper, "Lord, I love you, not for any reward, but because you are love itself." That was the essence of his sanctity. Not perfection, but perseverance. He fell many times, yet he always rose again. He doubted, yet he always returned to prayer. He suffered, yet he always sang. Every sunrise was a new beginning, and every failure was a reminder that grace was stronger than weakness. Each morning, he would say to his brothers, "Let us begin again, for until now, we have done nothing." This humble sentence captures the very heart of the Christian journey, the courage to start anew, even when everything seems lost. Holiness is not about never falling. It's about rising again with love. Francis showed the world that faith is not a destination, but a constant renewal, a daily yes to God's will, even in darkness. And maybe that's what we are called to remember today. You don't need to be a saint carved in stone to walk in the light. You just need the courage to begin again, to believe that love still matters, to see grace in the smallest moments, in the sound of the wind, in the face of a stranger, in the silence of your prayer. Because somewhere in that silence, God is still speaking, softly, patiently, endlessly, just waiting for you to listen. There are wounds that do not cause pain, but instead bring rebirth through grace. The life of Saint Francis entered a sacred turning point when he received the stigmata, the 5 holy wounds of Christ imprinted upon his body. It was the most mystical moment of his journey, the moment when the man, Francis, completely disappeared within the boundless love of God. In the year 1224, he ascended Mount Laverna to fast and pray. Alone in the wilderness, he sought only one thing: to feel, even in the smallest measure, the suffering of Christ on the cross, to understand the love that redeemed humanity. Then, one quiet morning, before the sun had risen, a mysterious light covered the mountain. Francis looked up and saw a seraphim, a 6-winged angel of fire, bearing the image of the crucified Christ. The light did not frighten him. It pierced his soul. From the cross, rays of divine fire shone upon his body. And when the vision faded, Francis felt a sweet and burning pain. On his hands, feet, and side appeared wounds, identical to those of Jesus. These were the marks of divine love, the seal between the soul and its creator. People who heard of this were astonished. Why would God choose Francis? They asked, but those who met him afterward understood. There was nothing worldly left in him. He had become one with Christ, living only through pure love, untouched by ambition or fear. Every step he took left a trace of blood, yet he smiled with gentle peace. He once whispered, "Love is not loved, and that is my sorrow." After receiving the stigmata, His body weakened rapidly, but as his flesh grew frail, his spirit shone brighter. He prayed longer, sang louder, and breathed in God's presence with every heartbeat. At night, while his brothers slept, he knelt before the crucifix and spoke softly as one speaks to a beloved. Lord, burn me completely in the fire of your love, so that I may live only for you and within you. One night, the brothers saw him press a trembling hand to his chest and smile faintly. My brothers, he said, the Lord has shown me true joy, to love even while in pain. Those words made them weep, for they realized few souls are chosen to feel the sorrow of Christ as Francis did. When his strength faded further, he asked to be carried back to Assisi. On the journey home, lying on a simple wooden stretcher, he looked up at the sky of his homeland and murmured, I thank you, Lord, for the sun, the fields, and the song of the birds. They are all hymns of praise too. You, the wind whispered, softly through the olive trees as if heaven itself answered, faithful servant, you have finished the race. Upon reaching the small friary, Francis knew his time had come. He asked to be laid naked upon the ground, desiring to die in the same poverty as Christ. His brothers wept, but he smiled and said, do not be sad, for from now on I shall be nearer to you than ever before. Before breathing his last, he sang, praised be you, my Lord, through sister death, from whom no living man can escape. Blessed are those who die in your grace, for they shall never die a second death. Then he closed his eyes. There was no sound, only a gentle fragrance filling the room. A soul had returned to the one it loved completely. That day, Assisi did not weep. The entire land fell into a sacred silence. People said even the birds circled the friary, singing their farewell. From that moment on, the story of Saint Francis was no longer just the story of a man, but a symbol of a soul that dared to love until the very end. A human heart that had touched the edge of heaven itself. Some people spend a lifetime searching, while others need only a single moment to encounter God. After Saint Francis of Assisi took his final breath, the entire town fell into a sacred silence. There were no cries of despair, only quiet tears of reverence and gratitude. Thousands of people came from near and far, not merely to mourn a man, but to honor a soul who had lived entirely for love and faith. As his body was carried through the narrow streets of Assisi, witnesses said the sweet fragrance lingered in the air, as if heaven itself had opened its gates to welcome its beloved saint. But the true miracle was not found in the wonders surrounding his death. It lived in the spiritual legacy he left behind, a way of life so simple and humble, yet powerful enough to change the world. He left no gold, no grand buildings, no earthly fame. Instead, he left a path, the path of returning to God through poverty, love, and gratitude. He once said, the truly rich man is the one who can live happily with little. After his passing, the Order of Friars Minor, the humble brotherhood he founded, spread throughout Europe. His followers did not only preach the gospel, they lived it. They cared for the sick, fed the poor, and brought the light of Christ to the darkest corners of the world. In every act of service, there breathed the spirit of Francis, simple, meek, and filled with love. Centuries have passed, but his message remains unchanged. Love all creatures, for within every living being is the breath of God. That is why, every year on April 10th, when the Church celebrates the feast of Saint Francis of Assisi, it is more than just a memorial. It is a divine invitation, an invitation to pause, to reflect, and to ask ourselves, have we truly lived the way God has called us to live? In today's noisy world, where people chase wealth and recognition, the voice of Francis still echoes softly. True happiness is not found in what we possess, but in what we give. Not in our status, but in the peace within our soul. He lived in poverty, yet his spirit overflowed with richness. He understood that only when a person empties themselves of everything can they be filled with the presence of God. Looking back on his life, we see not only a story of faith, but a story of transformation, the transformation of a proud young man into a humble saint. His life reminds us that anyone can become an instrument of God's will, if they are willing to surrender and be led by his hand. Imagine if each of us could live just a little like him, love more, forgive more, bow before the beauty of small things. How gentle this world would become. Perhaps the greatest miracle St. Francis left is not in the supernatural, but in a quiet reminder that holiness is not distant or impossible. It begins here, in our hearts, in the way we choose to love each day. So on this April 10th, the feast of St. Francis, take a moment of silence. Step outside, look at the sky, listen to the birds, smell the rain on the earth, and whisper, Lord, teach me to live simply, to love all creation, and to find you in the smallest things, in that very stillness. You may feel the spirit of Francis near, in the wind, in the sunlight, and within your own heart. Because he never truly left us, he is still here, quietly reminding us, when you love, you are already touching heaven. And if these words touched something deep within you, if you believe that love and faith can still transform this world, then, gently, I invite you to leave a like to help spread this message of light, and subscribe so we can continue walking together on this journey of discovering the wonders God is still performing, even in the silence of our everyday lives. For who knows, through a single story, a single moment of reflection, you might just hear God whispering your name.